in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm really excited to welcome our next guest onto the show, Beth Steinberg. She is the SVP of People and Talent at Chime. Beth, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little about yourself for our audience and the folks who are listening, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, thank you so much, Christina. Thank you for having me, inviting me on to do this podcast. And as you said, I'm Beth Steinberg, she, her, and hers. And a little bit about myself. I have been doing people and talent. It wasn't always called people and talent. It was, referred to as HR, human capital, which I know a lot of people still do for many, many years, like 20 something years, at a variety of different companies, both Fortune 500 companies like Nordstrom and Nike and EA. But my love is building companies. And so I've been, for the last kind of half of my career, I have been at emerging companies that are on their path to, tremendous scale, like Chime. The question of what did I want to be when I was younger, or what did I answer when someone asked me what did I want to be when I grew up? It was my whole life. I wanted to be a clinical psychologist.
Oh, wow.
My great uncle and aunt, my aunt is still alive today. She's like 94. They were both psychologists. My aunt was a family therapist and my uncle was a criminal psychologist. And so from a young age, I was very enthralled by the work that they did to help people, to solve problems. And that is what I always wanted to be until I really started getting into it when I was doing my master's program and realized that it was a little difficult for me at my young age, going straight from undergrad to grad school and not having the life experience to take all of that on from others. And so I deviated into this field, which is also, I think my psychology background really helps me in my job today.
Yeah, absolutely. What has led you in your personal journey to helping people and solving problems, specifically at Chime, leading their people and talent function?
Yeah. So I have been very lucky that I've worked for a lot of tremendous companies.
Absolutely.
And in every company that I've ever been at, as long as there was a product and there was capital and a product market fit, any stumbling that the company may have had was around people issues, around, not having the right people, not developing people appropriately, not leading people appropriately. And so, I've seen this pattern and feel that in this role, I am really able to help companies succeed through the diagnosis of organizational issues, the focus on leadership, good leadership, and developing a functional culture. And it's been, I think it's a very hard profession, especially in the last couple of years. But I feel strongly that you're really able to make a big difference in terms of the outcomes of companies in this role, which is, in my experience, leads to the success of people. And there's kind of been nothing better for me in my career to see so many people that I've worked with over the years become tremendously successful in their careers and, thrive in the workplace.
Absolutely. And when we're talking about leadership, organizational transformation and change and empowering people to do their best work, we're talking about company culture, whether you're hybrid, remote,
That's
remote
right.
first back in the office. What do you think are qualitative and quantitative ways we can think about measuring company culture today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a hard thing to measure, I'll be honest. It's kind of like, you know it even though sometimes you can't, see it or feel it. I want to start with just kind of grounding on what I see as culture.
Sure.
I define culture as the way that people behave when no one's watching.
Hmm.
And, I think that the term culture gets bandied about to mean a lot of different things. And, to mean parties and things, but I really think it is around how people treat one another,
Hmm.
how leaders treat one another when, they're not being watched or asked to do something a certain way. And I think that really defines the mark of a great company. And we measure things in a lot of different ways at Chime and throughout my career. I am a big fan of using surveys to measure culture. And I think you can look at engagement. It is one piece of data. You have to dig much deeper. You have to ask more questions once you get that data to really understand the full picture. I think you can measure it by observing how people work together, treat each other. I think you can measure it by the results of the business. So I think companies that are really struggling culturally, they're going to suffer over time in terms of their business outcomes, your ability to hire and retain talent. And then I think, kind of employee relations issues that you may have in the company, how prevalent they are, how quickly they're resolved. So there's a lot of different ways, I think, to measure both quantitatively and qualitatively. I would also say that any company that believes that culture is a responsibility of one person or one team is not going to have a sustainable, scalable, long-term culture. It is the job of all leaders, and moreover, the job of all employees to have a successful culture.
Absolutely. It's everybody's responsibility. There's a piece of accountability there, your teammates, peers, and other managers you're not working with directly. I do want to touch upon the unique role of leadership and in your role as SVP of people and talent, what the difference between managing individual contributors on your team is as opposed to managing a team of managers itself.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been managing for many, many years now, and I think a couple things remain completely the same. I think people should be treated respectfully, no matter what. You need to have open communication and dialogue within your organization. You have to create a climate of psychological safety. If you don't do that, you're never going to hear the truth. And I think it's very important to hear the truth. I think, I just read a quote, I think it was from Adam Grant, that said, if you stop listening, people are going to stop telling. And that I think is very accurate. And how do I manage managers differently? I mean, I've only managed managers for a really long time now in my career. But I would say, certainly with my team, and I have, I think, 8 direct reports right now. We are in a mode of operating where I am a supportive manager, but I don't remove responsibility. And I want them to achieve what I think they're capable of. Sometimes that's more than they think they're capable of. And I try to have a style where I am appropriately pushing people to do the best they can do, but always there behind them, beside them, beneath them to support them if something doesn't go right. And I think that is the job of a leader.
Absolutely. Helping people grow, empowering them to make decisions, and really supporting them as an advocate as well. Constructive feedback is always really important. How do you think about measuring the effectiveness of your leadership to create that psychologically safe space to have these open conversations and empowering people to do their best work?
Yeah, well, I would say, we look at data around this from our surveys. I mean, we literally have questions around, is your leader creating an open and trusting environment? And again, it's not the full truth, but it certainly is directional in terms of, are you going in the right way, or are you not? I also measure it, which is obviously a little less scientific, in are people willing to tell me what is really going on? If somebody is not meeting a goal, are they coming to me, being honest with me about it, and, engaging in conversation of how we can get things back on track? So I think, I look at, are people telling me the good and the not so good, or are they just trying to sugarcoat things and say the good? I think if that is the environment, you need to examine your leadership style. And, I do think there are leaders who create the dynamic where they only want to hear the positive. And that's just not reality. I mean, this work is very difficult. You're dealing with human beings. It's not always going to be smooth and easy, and that should not be your expectation.
Absolutely. You want to foster an environment where you want to hear it all. And just because you're only hearing positive things does not mean that only
That's
positive things are happening in the organization as well. And this work is definitely hard. So many people have talked about it on this interview series, but particularly over the past 2 years, it has been extremely challenging. People are going through a lot in their personal, professional lives. And with great challenges, there is an opportunity to redesign, be creative, and really innovate in this space. Can you share just how a system, process, policy, or initiative at Chime has been redesigned in the past kind of 2 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Chime was a very in-person company prior to COVID. Like we didn't really hire remotely. We maybe had a few people, but we were a pretty in-person company. And when we went into, the COVID shelter in place, we were only 300 employees. We are now closer to 1,300 employees. So the majority of people at Chime we've hired during this, 2-year, 18-month, COVID period. And so, I have to say I'm incredibly grateful and proud of my team that we had to change all our onboarding, all our interviewing, every single thing from, in person to a virtual process. And I honestly think my team did it within 2 weeks, and it's been pretty seamless with a few exceptions ever since. So I'm incredibly proud of that. I also think that, there is a bit of a dehumanization of just being on screen all the time and, not really getting to know people in the way that you might face to face. And, that, we've been pretty mindful of just, how do people talk to one another on Slack? Again, when you are not having to look somebody in the eye, you can, sometimes you say things that you may not otherwise say. So, I think we have looked at trying to figure out how we are more effective in terms of an async environment. We put in different processes and tools like, AllVoices for example, to make sure that we are getting a way to try to see what is going on that we're not seeing. And, from a diversity, equity, and belonging perspective, we have had an outside firm kind of look at all of our processes, our promo process, our interview process, all of our processes, to make sure that we are taking as much bias as we can out of those processes. And it's made a very big difference to the company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of growth, especially during this time as well, and rethinking all of these processes, no matter where the employee is in their journey, is really important. When we're talking about managers, company culture, there is this underlying theme of accountability, when it's everyone's responsibility to foster an environment where people want to come to work and do their best work. And I saw your post specifically around accountability and the importance of leaders to model this behavior. What does that look like in practice, if you could provide, an example or two?
Yeah, I mean, so, again, I have the fortunate place of, being in tech for, 15 plus years, and seeing the evolution of things over time. And I have seen kind of a pattern, in my opinion, of what differentiates good leaders from great leaders. And one of those, maybe the main quality I see, is the ability to take accountability, not only for your own success and failures, but those of your team. And I feel strongly that if somebody in my team isn't doing what we've asked them to set out to do, that's my responsibility. I'm accountable for that. And, in things like, diversity, representation, in things like, meeting your recruiting targets, in the general engagement of the team. I mean, we are at Chime, we are now looking at that kind of by leader, and really wanting leaders to feel that that's not the job of my team, that is their job as a leader. And so I think any place where you can take personal accountability and drive accountability into the company is important. And I never thought too much about the intentionality of accountability until I was at Brightroll, which was, I guess, 2013, and the company eventually got bought by Yahoo. And it was, a great company. And I think I was there when it was maybe 200 people. And my team had to kind of retool a bunch of things, and we were responsible for doing something, and we missed it. And basically I got up and said to the whole company, like, yeah, we missed it. This is on me.
Yeah.
I own it, and I owe you better. And people were shocked. And I was shocked that people were shocked, but it dawned on me that people were shocked because not many leaders do that. And I saw the impact of kind of that truthful and simple act that I did, of saying, yeah, we messed up and this is on me. And so I do think it is a really important, critical leadership quality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, showing up with humility, and also building that relationship with folks as well. If you want them to come to you with not only the positive feedback, but kind of the negative, if you messed up, not hiding it as well. Cultivating that environment is so important.
That's right. I mean, at the end of the day, people at work are still human beings first. Right. And you have to think about that, right? People are human beings. They're going to have good days and bad days. And, you have to always keep that in mind. One of our values at Chime is be human. And, I think about that every single day, that people have a lot going on right now in their lives.
Absolutely. There's so much going on in the world, in people's lives, no matter where they are, physically and emotionally, in terms of well-being as well. How do you see employee feedback management as a really important tool to really build this culture of listening and really trust that's, of course, two-way at Chime?
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think feedback is critically important, but I think it's much more difficult than people believe or understand. And, giving feedback that's heard, accepting feedback in a graceful way is a skill.
Yeah.
And it needs to be learned, it needs to be taught, it needs to be practiced. And I think that, we have this false narrative that people become leaders and all of a sudden, by osmosis, they're going to understand how to do these things. And, I say to people, well, how would they know? How would you know? I could be an engineer, but I would have to study and I would have to practice. And, I don't know why we think that leadership is different. It's not different. It's a skill and a craft. It must be learned, taught, practiced. But I think, my premise as a philosophy is nobody comes in to sabotage the company. Nobody's coming into work and is like, I'm going to do a crappy job today, So if someone is not succeeding, there's usually a reason for it. They don't have the tools, the training, the support. They don't understand something. There's something amiss in the dynamics. Maybe they weren't the right skill set for the role. There's a lot of different reasons why people aren't successful. And I think it is the job of a leader to help dissect why and help fix it if you can. Now, you can't always fix it. And sometimes things are just not meant to be. And I think you have to accept that and treat people respectfully and gracefully and, figure out a solution. But I think if you take the time to listen and to learn and to understand, many things can be fixed and coached and changed. So I see feedback and the whole feedback process as a way to help people succeed. If your feedback process in your company or your performance management or whatever, people refer to it, is to seek out failure, you are making a big mistake. It really should be set up to help people succeed. And the small percentage of people who maybe, need a more aggressive intervention, those should be handled separately.
Absolutely.
You don't design a process for 1% when 99% are doing what you need them to do. And I think that's a big flaw in how people think about performance management, performance feedback.
Absolutely. It's definitely a process and a continuous learning curve for leaders and for individuals as well. Everyone's bringing their own experiences too. So you can have the best company culture, but people, were working somewhere where feedback wasn't as openly given or mistakes as accepted as well. So it's important to remember that as well.
And I also think, being a senior leader in a company, you have to model that behavior too. You should be able to give the feedback and take the feedback and not be afraid to hear that. And I think that goes back to the beginning of our conversation. Like, if you stop listening, people are going to stop telling. And that is the mark of a pretty dangerous culture, in my opinion.
I definitely agree with that as well. And I know you mentioned people can come directly to you or your team, and there's performance management and another channel of feedback is anonymous. And I
Yeah.
want to ask, from your opinion, why it's important to have another channel where people can voice their concerns in an anonymous way.
Yeah, I mean, we are fortunate at Chime that we have a really amazing people partner organization where, our people partners have very integrated and deep relationships within the business, and are really there to help people in the business succeed. So
Yeah.
we are pretty fortunate that we have many outlets for people to come to.
Yeah.
However, as much as I would like it to be the case that everybody feels comfortable and open to come to myself or somebody on my team or their own manager, that is not reality. And I think it is very important that companies provide a mechanism where people who want to come forward and raise something anonymously have the ability to do so. And, if you don't have that, you're going to have issues that you're not aware of and you don't have any ability to fix or remedy. And so I do think it's painful to me in many ways that not everybody feels like they can come to myself or my team. But again, it's reality, and we have to have another mechanism to make sure we truly understand everything going on in the company and the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely want to understand what's happening with folks as well, especially in a digital environment.
That's right.
Beth, I want to ask you a couple of questions. I know we've been focusing on Chime and your personal journey, and in terms of your experience in the field and in tech, I want to ask, what are some, so not necessarily at Chime, what are common mistakes you're seeing companies making in their people strategy, especially when they're in this kind of hyper growth and they're hiring a ton of folks stage?
Yeah. Well, we've made a lot of, we've done great, but I look back and think there's things that we could have done differently and better at Chime and at any company I've ever been at. But I think a couple things. I think over hiring is a big problem that I see. And I think that oftentimes when we see a gap, we feel like it can be solved by a person or a resource. And that's not necessarily the case. And I really challenge people before adding or over adding resources, they look to see, is the culture driving what we want it to drive? Are there systems and processes to support the work? Do we have the right people on the team already? And to really try to dissect what's going on before you add headcount. And I think that's hard for people because it takes more time, but I think it's a really important thing to do. I also think there is no substitute for building trust with your team. If you don't have a foundation of trust where people genuinely know that you are there for them and to help people succeed, you are not going to drive the business outcomes that you would drive otherwise. When people don't feel trust and safety, you will not get innovation, or it will hinder innovation or risk taking. Again, not telling the full story about things. I mean, there's data and research on this that proves this to be true. You look at the Boeing situation. I mean, there's so many things. And I just think sometimes, as a company's really scaling, it's important to know you have to sometimes go slow to go fast. And if you don't take that time to seek to understand, to build relationships, to build trust, you will hit a hiccup going forward, and it will not be as easy to resolve because you will not be starting from that foundation of trust and respect.
Absolutely. And it's a continuous process of building and continuing to foster that environment of trust.
Absolutely.
And it comes back to intentionality as well. And really, it doesn't just happen because we will it to happen.
That's right.
I guess on the flip side, in terms of a must have when you're thinking about the next generation and the future for people leaders, what is a need to have that folks need to incorporate in their strategy to potentially be successful in the future, knowing that we don't have a crystal ball, but based on the experiences that we have right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, this role is evolving tremendously, right? And if you think about what it was 20 years ago versus what it is today, I mean, I think, for maybe the last 5 or 7 years, it's really come into its own where, it's a must have in a company instead of like a nice to have or a necessary evil in some cases. And I think what is, in my opinion, a must to have is really linking your work, the work of this team of people and talent to the outcomes and success of the business.
Mhm.
And, that is why we exist. We're, obviously we want to create a great environment, but that environment is in service of business results, right? Because the better the company does, the better it's going to be for all of our employees, the more opportunity they're going to have, the more ability they are going to have to advance, in their career. And so I think the most important aspect of this job, looking forward, is how you really link the work that this team does to the outcomes of the business.
And it's definitely directly related because it's arguably people are the most important asset to your company. They're working on your product,
That's right.
service, they're
That's
creating
right.
the environment. So it's really important as well. And it's related to the business and innovation and progression of the company. Beth, is there anything that we kind of discussed, where it's taking up the most brain space or something that I didn't ask you as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that take up my brain space
Yeah.
on a daily basis. But I think one thing that I think many companies are, including Chime, is going to experience that is new to everybody is what's going to happen when people who choose to are able to go back into the office. And I think a lot about, when we'll be opening, people can go in now, if they want to, they're not asked to, but if they choose to, and then we're opening a larger office in April. And again, people will be doing hybrid in a number of different scenarios, depending on what's best for them and their team. But by the time we go back, we'll have hired over 1,000 people, most who have never met each other face to face.
Yeah.
And, that's something I've never had to deal with before. I also am very mindful that we're going to have a scenario where pretty much everybody was on Zoom, for meetings all the time, where now you're going to have some people who are in the office, some people who are working from home.
Mhm.
And, how are you going to create an equitable environment with many people doing different things? And I think about it a lot. I don't have a lot of answers for it. We actually at Chime put together a hybrid work task force that is, my team and diversity and technology and workplace, trying to aggregate and collate as much information as we can to share with leaders and employees on, how we see this all working. So I think about that a lot. I also think about just how do we continue to build and support better leadership. I have seen in my career such a direct link between people who had great leaders and their engagement, their long-term success, their overall well-being, and people who did not have great leaders. And, I feel a real responsibility to make sure that we have the best leaders we can possibly have at Chime, because that's the only way we're going to create a great environment and meet, the lofty goals that we have as a company.
Yeah, it sounds like there are a lot of projects and initiatives and questions that are being strategized for the future. And there's a lot to think about, and there's no kind of right or wrong or magic answer there, and really customizing it to meet people where they are.
That's true. I would say one smart thing that we did, and I'm grateful we got the support to do this. While a lot of companies pulled back on leadership development over this time period, we accelerated leadership development, and we put in coaching programs, respectful workplace programs, basic manager, new to leading programs. We really tried to make sure there was an offering for every single leader at Chime. And the data proved that it made a big difference. We did a manager effectiveness survey, and leaders who went through one of the programs that we provided were anywhere from 3 to 9 points higher as an aggregate on the management effectiveness survey than leaders who did not. And so I would really encourage companies to not see investing in leadership development as a nice to have, but to see it as an imperative to the scaling of the company.
Leadership development is so important. People are not born people managers or to these resources.
That's right.
Frameworks and really support people as well, have the resources too.
That's right. Absolutely right.
Beth, is there 1 to 2 key insights or calls to action that you hope listeners bring with them after hearing our conversation today around trust, transparency, leadership development, and investing in your people?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I've just kind of learned over time is, and in my maturity as a leader, is to first stop and seek to understand. Don't assume that you know all the answers. Don't assume that your way is the only way. To really seek to understand before making assumptions and assertions about anything. And I think that's really critical. I think the second thing is the best leaders that I know are the leaders who have the capacity and maturity to look in the mirror and to be self-aware of their own strengths and gaps, and open about, don't use them as an excuse, but to be open about their own strengths and gaps. We all have places where we flourish, and we all have opportunities to get better, or gaps that we need support on. And I think it's critical that a leader looks in the mirror and takes accountability for their own leadership if they're going to be a successful leader to a company.
Self-awareness, very important.
Very important.
Well, to all relationships, and especially at work when you're working with all different people and environments, asynchronous work as well. Beth, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Christina.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employee feedback management as a requirement for the company to succeed overall. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.